Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to Your Frequency Shift, the space where we delve into the depth of the human experience, uncovering the layers of what makes us who we are. I'm Karis, and joining us is my incredible husband and co-host, Nick. And today we have a truly special guest, someone who has not only impacted Nick's life profoundly, but also inspires so many through his journey of embracing vulnerability and redefining masculinity. Michael Cooper, entrepreneur, devoted father, passionate athlete, and teacher of emotional alchemy. Welcome to the show.
Wow. Wow. What an introduction. Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me. That's an introduction. I'm going to take you on tour wherever I go.
Happy to come. Michael, your life has been, from what Nick has described to me, has been such a tapestry of just rich experiences, from building really successful businesses to nurturing your children with an incredible amount of love and intention. I would love if you could just share with us the moment you realized that vulnerability for you is such a superpower.
I don't know where it came from. I think it's birthed in me. I've known this from a really young age. And when I would relate, even as a young boy, like I remember my first kiss was 9 years old, and that was my first vulnerable moment, right? I was so scared, but I lent into that. And from that, I'm not saying that was the pivotal point. It was just, I felt it was in me. And I've always loved to the degree that I'm willing to be annihilated. I'm willing to show myself. I'm willing to wear my heart on my sleeve. And I don't think there was a pivotal moment that caused me to realize the strength of it. It was just a virtue that I wanted to live by. And I just knew that from a really young age. And so for me, it's always been a virtue or a strength. And I've never seen that maybe what society will witness or experience or feel is the negative side of that, or the weakness to it, or the fear around it. I believed if I wasn't being vulnerable, I wasn't living on my edge.
So just diving a little bit deeper into that, do you find that, having that awareness and having that deep-seated understanding from such an early age, that this has maybe been one of the foundational teachings in your work over the last couple of years?
I can't say I've consciously done that as a decision, as a business plan, or a way of life or being. It's just more what I've embodied, I think, and everything that I do is embodiment. So I might learn something, but until I own it and I can walk it and just be the epitome of that, whatever that thing is, then that comes through in my teachings. And I think a lot of people experience my vulnerability as a model of what is possible, or whether it's something I teach and go, oh, vulnerability is important. I think it more comes through in my essence.
When I look at by definition, what vulnerability means, it is uncertainty, risk exposure, and also the emotional exposure that comes with that. And it's having this degree of I don't know what's going to happen. I have no control over what is happening next, people's responses, but I'm willing to sit completely in and own exactly who I am in that moment. And it comes with a lot of courage. There's a lot of comfort that comes with staying within what society deems as acceptable, and vulnerability is so outside the circle of that. For a lot of people, it's across the board, whether you're masculine or feminine. And so I think as we dive deeper into today's topic, it's around the nature of vulnerability and what its relationship is with masculinity, because I found it so interesting when Nick and I were talking about it, because it almost seems like it's whoa, we don't go there. or it's even when it is approached as a subject, it's like, okay, I'm being vulnerable, but we're not really being vulnerable. You're touching on the idea of it, versus actually embodying what it means to be vulnerable. And so when I look at what the definition of vulnerability is, it by nature, it is you being brave, you having the courage to sit in the discomfort, and being willing to not be accepted, to not fit in. But at the same time, you're also not betraying yourself in order to fit in. It is that I belong to myself, and when I know that I innately belong, and I accept myself in all areas, then I will belong in every way, because I don't have to betray myself in order to fit in, which I think is a skill that a lot of people are still learning. And so my question to you was just, when it comes to vulnerability and masculinity, what is something that you have seen in the work that you've done with so many men and people in general, when it comes to vulnerability and not being willing to sit in that?
Yeah, great question. Well, I will talk about men/masculinity, but I've also been witnessing with the way that society, social media, conforming and all of the things, women as well are getting, I guess, more and more protected, or more and more shielded and reluctant to show vulnerability. When that was in their innate way, that was in their essence of being feminine. It was just natural and flow and ease and grace and wearing your heart like for everyone to see. And that's the divine feminine, where she doesn't play games and she doesn't hold back, and it's like, I love you, and she's apparent with it. You don't have to guess. Whereas I've noticed society these days, women have been, I would suggest, coming through from trauma and pain and hurt and being let down and not met, and the list of that could go on. They've learned to protect and shield themselves and not be vulnerable as well. And so now we've got that, which is, I don't know if you've both seen it, one of my favorite pieces of artwork from Burning Man. I think it was 2014. And it was this beautiful sculpture out in the desert. And it was a metal sculpture of two adults facing the opposite direction. And so the adults with their inner child inside this beautiful sculpture, just reaching out, begging, can we just touch? Can we just talk? And so now we've got a whole society depicting that artwork, where the adults are shut down and I'm not going to show you my cards because you're going to hurt me. Both men and women are doing that, whereas their inner child's just begging to talk and connect and touch. So it's quite a dire situation that we've got in, because when men were traditionally less vulnerable, or maybe resistant to being vulnerable, or just didn't even understand it, it was okay because we had one of our counterparts who was the woman who could help them and support them, and slowly behind closed doors at the home, and we don't talk about it, help them be vulnerable. But now when the women are not being able to do that for themselves, how can they do it for the men? So I think the first part was systemically, men and women, masculine and feminine, they're both interchangeable. We're all suffering with a lack of vulnerability and the ability to access that. But to answer your question, what I really see with in the men's space specifically around, there's that, especially many generations ago, they were brought up in war. There was 2 world wars that they had to navigate, plus others. And there was all of this tough mentality. And like, I grew up in the environment that boys don't cry like a girl, or otherwise I'll give you something to cry about. Boys don't cry. Don't be like a girl, and all of these things. So we got taught in our formative years that it's not okay for me to cry. It's not okay for me to be expressive. It's not okay for me to be emotional. And then they've cloaked it with a cool term and said you need to be stoic, because that's what a man is. And apparently, this is incorrect. This is just media twisting things. Stoicism is void of all emotion. And it's not. It's actually feeling all the emotion, handling the emotion, and then transmuting that to a thing that can serve you. That's stoicism. It's not being pulled around like use an oak tree for masculinity always. The oak tree is deeply rooted into the earth. It's got a wide base. It is deeply grounded and stuck and anchored in and feeding from Mother Earth. But that trunk is so deep and so thick and so grounded. When the wind blows, which is the mother, the feminine, when she blows with all the chaos, the oak tree doesn't bend. He can hold himself in that presence and that groundedness. And so men I guess, been taught, or have just perceived based on, oh, hang on, dad never cries, or dad never expresses himself, or dad, that must be what I do. And so they, you know what kids are like, you know, they don't listen to what you say, they watch what you do. And so from generation to generation to generation, men have been taught by their greatest teacher, their godlike figure between 0 and 7, their dad, the one who knows all, the one who has all the answers and he knows everything. He knows the way, he's got the keys to the kingdom. And he doesn't do those things. He doesn't express himself. He doesn't tune into his body. He doesn't even understand anything beneath the neck. But he's a great thinker. He's very left-brained and he'll logic his way out of everything. And so they've overdeveloped their left-brain thinking. And men, you know, we go through school and we all get awards and ribbons and certificates for our intellect. And that means I'm worthy in the world. And so men over the years have been more and more conditioned into thinking that vulnerability is weakness. And a woman won't respect me. She won't love me if I am weak. So why would I want to be weak in front of her? And then we had the rise of the feminine saying, we want to see more from you men. And so then they were in this paradox. Like, what do I do with this? I've got my dad telling me don't show emotion. I've got my women asking me for emotion. And I'm torn between the two because my dad's my God. He's my idol at a subconscious level between 0 and 7. And then my wife, she's the one that I really want to please and keep happy. And my sole purpose on this rock is to provide and keep her safe. And if she's not happy with me, so I don't know what to do now. And then they just go, oh, and they shut down. And they become mute. And they don't feel. There's so many men I've worked with, which was me included. I think my first set of tears came through at around 43, I think it was. And I didn't know how to cry. I went through the police service at 18. You can't cry on the front line. You know, you're enforcing that you cannot show weakness. You cannot show emotion. You cannot show. I remember guys would in a line of, you know, at a pub fight or a brawl or wherever it was, the football, people would spit at you and you'd have to stand there and just be resilient and like stoic and just not react. And so I used to come home and my mum would see me. She'd say, I used to watch you die every day. Your light would just dim and dim and dim. This was an 18-year-old who was full of life. And by 2.5 years, I'd walk in the door like a zombie because I couldn't express this. I couldn't tell what trauma I saw at work. I don't want to push that onto my family. So I suppressed more and more and more. And my mum just watched the light go out. And so many men, even though they might not have the police service as a job, but they've got their own jobs, all of these things are still happening to them. And they become more and more withdrawn because they don't know how to release. They don't know how to express. So yeah, my first tears came through at like 40, 43. I went to funerals and I thought, I should be crying here. This is one of those moments. Come on, let's roll the tears out, even if they're fake. I couldn't even fake. Not at all. And so we've got to that state where there is a shift that's starting to occur, but it's a lot of work.
Just going back a little bit there, Michael, you said something quite profound there, handling emotion. And when we look at vulnerability, I think you've touched on so many different points of maybe the misunderstanding around vulnerability, because there's either this suppression or disassociation, because, well, we've been taught not to share that, so we don't feel safe enough to share that. That's not what a man does. The other part, and we were going to dive into this, which was just the emotional dumping side. You mentioned that as well. You didn't want to dump those feelings on the people closest to you, because, well, you knew intuitively that was none of their business, and this was something that you that was something that you had to navigate within yourself. But I think where so many men get stuck, and it's around the handling of the emotion, because, I mean, vulnerability isn't taking the feelings that you have and throwing it on someone and saying fix it, or falling apart, and not to having a clear sense of accountability and saying, look, you can see me in this space. You can feel that I'm navigating X, Y, and Z, but I'm not just sitting and bathing in this. I'm moving through it. I'm processing it. I'm handling it. I am alchemizing what's happening inside. Just from, you said that you obviously only had an emotional moment from, in your 40s, where you allowed yourself to cry and just release. What led you to being able to release and express what you had pent up what you had pent up inside over such a long period of time?
Ooh. It was a big thing, obviously. So the precursor to that was I'd gone through a divorce. I'd gone through wanting to take my life as a result of that. And then it all became too much. And I actually I got invited by just divine intervention. I was at that point, at that real dark point, where it was near the end game, and that week, someone just out of the blue got introduced to me and said, you should come to this thing. I said, no idea. Anyway, the reason I cried, and the moment that I cried, was because it was a day for men, which is the stuff that you and I do now, which is rather ironic. But at the time, I was allowed to speak, to be witnessed, and then to be accepted in all of my shame. And there was like a shame in that point for me. I spoke into all of my shames. And at the end of the day, the leader of the day, even though he was younger than me by a significant amount, he was a well-built guy, but he simply stood on a higher point than everyone else. So he was the leader for the day, metaphorically, physically, and energetically across the whole things. And he looked at me and he says, you're a beautiful human. And in that moment, that whole day completed a whole initiation. It could take some boys 2 weeks to a month to complete. I was given a space to speak. I was made feel safe to speak. I was encouraged to speak, and not speak how you doing, what's your life like. No, let's speak directly to the thing, and that for me, I feel like a failure. I feel like an imposter, and how can I speak on relationships when I can't even hold my wife, and all of the shame. And I owned all of my stuff in that moment. I hide behind my 3-piece suits. I hide behind my multiple businesses and cars and all of the flash. And I'm a scared little boy underneath. And at the end of it, I was held and I was hugged by other grown men and celebrated for just speaking my truth. And then that final piece was to be acknowledged by the father figure of the day. As I said, even though he was younger, I saw him as the father of that group. So I was acknowledged in our indigenous cultures as by the chief, or in various initiations, it's just by the tribe leader. So that is a complete initiation, and that was the cataclysmic moment that next allowed me to express. And I cried for hours when I ended up starting. It was hours, and probably weeks after it, I would just be sitting there really happy. 5-6 days later, and then just start crying, and I didn't even know why. It just kept coming out for weeks, and it was beautiful. I got to see finally the beauty in my tears, cleansing my soul. I got to see how magical all of my pain was, and how beautiful it was to, because energy, emotion, and I know you guys know this deeply, that emotion is energy in motion. And as humans, we get really good at allowing that energy to come to us and pass through, as it does so well, right? You might win lotto, and two weeks later, people are like back to normal. They're back to their miserable selves. They've got 30 million in the bank, but they're miserable. But they allow those good things to pass through. But with the negative emotions, we're attached to it, we identify with it, and that anchors in our body, and then it becomes stuck and stagnant. And so I was releasing all of this stuff for decades of trauma and pain and hurt and betrayal. And so that's why it took months. And my life has been infinitely better since. Infinitely better since. So there's this real beauty in, one, going through that initiation. I think whether it doesn't have to be that one, an initiation for all boys is the first stepping stone to getting to vulnerability. Because when you do an initiation, you face off on your own mortality, you face off on your limitations, you face off on your limiting beliefs, but then you come home and you're radically accepted and celebrated by the people who matter most, is the ones you look up to. And that acknowledgement, and in that moment, is when boys shift from boy psychology into man psychology. And at this point, when they've finally got there, we went a long way to get here, by the way. Sorry about that. And when they finally get full circle, they can embody. Everyone talks about king energy. They got no idea what king energy is. King energy, one of the key virtues is vulnerability and empathy. Wow. So there's lots of little boys running around calling themselves kings, but they're princes with all love and respect. The king is the one who can express vulnerability. And if we really look at the roles of a king, the king is the one who speaks the orders into existence. Where does he go to get that order from? He goes to the feminine oracle, always. In all of the mythology and all of the stories, and if you don't know into that, if all in your Lord of the Rings and all the other mythical type movies, the king always has an oracle. He always has the feminine, and he seeks her counsel. And he is the one who, the land bows before the king. He bows before the feminine. And this is vulnerability. The king, where everyone bows in front of him, will bow to the feminine, will bow to the oracle and seek her counsel. He won't go against it. He listens. He might not see the alignment and truth with it, but he'll find the truth in it. And then he goes and communicates that to the community. And so without this, there's a lot of boys missing that king component because they can't, or men, sorry, because they can't access their vulnerability. They can't feel. They can't feel themselves, so how can they feel someone else? And this is what their woman is really asking. And if we want to maybe just soundbite this next bit for anyone who really wants to get on top of this. In society, the feminine is asking for, we want to see your vulnerability. We spoke into the definition of vulnerability, and it takes courage. Well, the Latin word for courage comes from core, which means from the heart. What she's really asking is to see your heart. And so when a woman asks you, this is for the guys, if a woman asks you or says to you or claims that I just don't see you, what she's really saying is I don't feel you. I can't feel you, and I can't feel your heart. And so what men get lost in is they think, oh, but I can't share those problems with her, or I'll lose my masculinity, or she'll lose respect for me. It's like, absolutely. You dump that on her, she will, and she should. That's not her problem, but you're offloading it to her, and now you're asking her to step into the masculine. Because by you doing that, by dumping it onto her, it says, honey, I don't have the bandwidth for this. And it's a beautiful wife or woman or partner will She'll be like, I can. And she'll step into her masculine and she will go into the fixing role. And now you wonder why you don't have polarity in a relationship. You don't have intimacy because you've asked her to be the man and you emasculated yourself. So the way around that is when she says, I want you to be more vulnerable. I want to see your vulnerability. And she's not asking you to wail around on the floor and cry, and which is totally fine if you do. Just say, hey, I'm going to do this. I want you to watch me. Step into your feminine, let her be in her feminine, witness you that. Or you could simply say, honey, I've been at work. I'll be really honest with you. There's a few challenges. And when I felt into those challenges at work, it's really making me feel, she can understand this because you're using the word feel. I feel really contracted. I feel disappointed. And I've got to be honest, there's a little bit of frustration in my body because of these things that are happening at work. But I want you to know that I've spoken to Mike, or I've spoken to Nick, or I've spoken to my coach or my best mate or my brotherhood. And we worked out a couple of things, and I'm going to, I've still got those feelings, but I processed them out. And I think we're heading in the right direction now. And what that says to your woman is, I can access my body. I felt into the feelings, like I was in my head and I was like the work thing, and I could get into the spreadsheet part of it. And it's about how I feel. And I went in and I felt those feelings, and I sought my mentor, my coach, my brother, whoever it is. And I workshopped it with him. And all you need to know is we're heading in the right direction. Now, I've been incredibly vulnerable. I shared what the problem was, how it made me feel. But the most important thing is I said to my wife or beloved but I've resourced it already. I don't need you to resource. I've already resourced it. And here's our direction. Because ultimately that's what she's looking for. Oh, my guy's got problems. Great. He's got problems, because if he doesn't have problems, I know he's lying to me. If he's not lying to me, I can't trust him. And now you've got a whole safety issue with your beloved. So when you can express, you can regulate yourself, and you can deliver it in a way that she goes, he's got problems, but he's handling it. Okay, babe, I can support you. What do you need? She doesn't have to do the heavy lifting. She doesn't have to do anything. And that makes her feel safe. And ultimately, the feminine is seeking what from us? Safety. So our vulnerability actually creates safety for her. That's a mic drop there. Our vulnerability creates safety. The thing we fear the most, the thing we think creates weakness or is insipid or pathetic, creates safety.
There's a quotation thank you for sharing that, Michael. Genuinely mic drop moment. I just we also have input from the little one in the background. I've just made peace with it, that it is what it is right now. I always think of, there's a quote by Khalil Gibran that says, love one another. Yeah, right. I'm gonna try and pick up and then we'll try again. One sec. But it goes, love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a moving sea between the shores of your souls. And vulnerability, I think, is the only thing that is one of the biggest things that allows that sea to flow freely between partners. And I love what you said about the king being able to go into his heart and show his heart and take accountability for what's in there and not expecting the queen to hold it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Vulnerability, like you said, is not the emotional damping, but it requires emotional sovereignty. And that is, I think, what you highlighted there. It's the ability to stand within, hold, take accountability for all of that. And I always reflect back to, I went on a retreat and we did this exercise, and I'll never forget it because it was so powerful in the vulnerability aspect. It's very similar to yours, except we had to pair up with someone, and we had to show our worst faces, contort our faces. And so, in the exercise, we had to show each other what felt like the worst part of ourselves, and physically for someone to see it. And the other person just had to sit there and hold space for that. And initially, there were so many people who just didn't want to do it because there was so much shame that came up with it. It was like, oh, and this is the thing why people fear vulnerability so much is because we fear the disconnection that comes in the after. And vulnerability if it is true vulnerability and you are being discerning with who you are showing vulnerability to, it doesn't bring disconnection. It only enhances that connection.
Yes.
Are you saying amen?
Yeah, absolutely. Amen. Yeah. I definitely agree.
It was such an interesting thing because it almost like unlocked something for me where I could see that, someone saw what looked like the worst part of me or what felt like the worst part of me, and they still love me.
Yeah.
They can see all of me, still hold me. Wasn't too much. It wasn't scary. It was just what it was.
Yeah.
And so this is where I think emotional literacy and learning the difference between
okay.
Oh,
I
sorry.
found this on the web, so this is where I emotional literacy and learning the difference.
All right, Siri is also involved in our podcast.
Everyone's in today. We've channeled everyone to come through.
Wow. But yeah, I think when it comes to emotional literacy, it's learning what these different things mean. And vulnerability isn't damping. And being able to hold space for someone on the other end isn't fixing things. And it's just also all of these aspects of things that also come with discernment, because Nick and I were having a chat about it the other day about there's something in us sometimes when we're in the learning and healing phase that feels so masochistic to a degree. Because it's like, do you know what? Let me just go and fuck around a little bit and see how much I've learned in this arena of things. Because I think that I've learned the most in the school of life right now, and I win. And then there's something in us that's like, you know what? Let me just go and choose that person, even though I know that that's the wrong person on some level. And you have your gut screaming at you saying like, this is not the person to be vulnerable with. And if you have that belief in you that says, if I'm vulnerable, people disconnect, or when I show myself, people leave me, or whatever the internal belief is, and you have an experience like that where you've chosen to go and be vulnerable with the wrong person, or not the wrong person, because ultimately, I really believe that everything is here to help us. But we also can spare ourselves the pain by learning a bit of discernment. And I think sometimes people confuse stoicism I think they confuse discernment with the stoicism, because I think discernment, it takes that you have to be able to be still within yourself, connect to your heart, and then be able to look at what's happening in your space and move from there. But I wanted to talk about more into that vulnerability in romantic relationships, because there's such a big when you were speaking about the princes, it's almost like it's Peter Pan syndrome, because when men are in that space, they almost expect their wives or their partners to become like their moms and just I've brought this to the table, fix it, make my bed, do the things, and when you don't, it's like, okay, you also I've seen it within Nick and I's dynamic. It's been, we've been trying to learn how to do this for the last couple of years, especially, and it has been one heck of a journey. And I'm so grateful that he's been taking more, what's the word? Yeah, he's been more in tune with the language of what owning who you are and what vulnerability means to him, because I think what I've experienced is that it erodes any communication when you're not in that with yourself. And I've seen it erode our relationship when we've been at an end just before we've come back together. It's always been the same thing. It's that whole thing of, I need more vulnerability, I need more presence. And he's like, but I am giving you vulnerability. And I'm like, but you're not. I can see what you're trying to do. I still don't feel you. And you're just putting everything on me. And I can't fix it because that's not my role.
Yep.
So my question was, what would you say to someone who's in that same space? And I know you've touched on a lot of the points, but yeah, I would love if you could just, what would you say to someone that is in that space? Because there's a lot of people, I think, moving through a similar dynamic at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I'll circle back around on that. Firstly, I wanted to drop back into when you were sharing around the vulnerability. You were talking about removing any masks or being your most authentic self. That's the highest level of vulnerability, right? Is to be your unapologetic, authentic self and go, yeah, this is me. Like, this is all of me. And when you have that, that's the scariest place to be, because I might be rejected or I might be abandoned, which is childhood wounding. And so I think the way to overcome that one first is self-acceptance. You know, it's as simple as standing in front of the mirror saying, I love you. See how awkward that is? It's rough. That's tough work, that one. It sounds simple, right? But if they can come starting with a space of self-acceptance and then being raw and real, that's authenticity. It's not being with, it's about being present with what's here right now. You know, in an argument, and I'll get into maybe some examples. If I was in an argument and I'm doing all right, I'm not feeling any pressure, I'm holding space really well, and then something comes out that is the button pusher, and I'm like, and my nostrils flare and my jaw tightens, and I'm like, oh, I want to get in now. I was sitting on the sidelines and now I want to get in. Vulnerability is expressing, and I'm like, I need to stop you there. I feel it. I'm like, that hurt. And usually by at least voicing it and giving it a voice, that emotion. I just said to my woman that I'm that hurt. You hurt me. That's weakness in some people's eyes, but it's actually a strength, because what I'm is diffusing that hurt by breathing it in, feeling it. I'm like, yep, it's hurt. Where specifically? In my solar plexus. Oh, she took my personal power. Okay, good. And I just breathe it out. I can now come back to her and say, hey, I'm going to let you know that really hurt, but I'm okay to keep going. And she's, in that moment, I built so much trust, even in a fight, by saying, hey, here, I've accessed it. I can talk to it. I can express it. I'm not projecting it. And I regulated. I regulated myself when I really wanted to snap. I went, maybe I have to shake, like shake my hands and get rid of it, and then go, okay, cool. And I'm okay to keep going. But I also set a boundary in there to say, hey, he's a little bit unfuckwithable. I don't know if I can say that on the podcast, but I can edit it out. And so it shows that I can push his major button that really gets him, and he holds ground. He breathes it in, and he just says, yeah, that hurt, but go on. Okay, wow, who's this guy? Who is this guy? He can take my best shot and stand ground. So that's what something someone could do, is actually just be really present to what's alive and speak into it. And any partner that I've been with, if I've always expressed this really early in relationships, if we're in an argument or a heated discussion or a fight even, where it's at, and my anger's getting too much, I want to show you right now what I'm going to do. And I want you to know now when we're fine and we're safe and we're all happy. And I want to know that this is not directed at you. I'm just diffusing energy that doesn't serve either of us. And so I'd say to her, if and when we get in that moment, I'm going to stop the conversation. I said, can you give me a minute? And I put my head between my legs and I just let out whatever sound needs to come out. It might be a swear word. It's like, rah! Well, I really let it out. I don't just go, rah! I really with the ferocity that needs it to get rid of it is the ferocity that I need to use to get out. But my head is in between my legs, not looking at my partner. And then I come back and I check in with my body and I say, hey, am I okay? Do I need more? Do I need to let go of more? Am I good to go? Maybe 2 or 3 breaths, regulate my body, come back, and I'm still shitty, but I'm not angry. And I turn around and I say, I really appreciate you letting me do that. That wasn't going to serve either of us, but I'm really good to keep moving. And I will step closer to my partner at that point to show that I'm here and I'm in support and I'm immovable. You can push all my buttons and my oak tree just gets bigger. And so that's something people can do, is communicate early and often what you could do if you're triggered. And guess what? If you've got a heartbeat, you're liable to get triggered. It's just, we're all open to it. I don't care how, we look at all the monks and we think they're amazing. People think they're stoic or they don't feel emotions. They feel every emotion as it's live, in its real, in its fullness. And they breathe it in and they transmute it. Energy again. And so people would think that's the pin-up boy of lack of vulnerability or stoicism, but actually it's the opposite. They're actually fully feeling it and they're not avoiding it and they're not dispersing it. They live it and then they let it go, which is what we should do with all the emotions, right? The good and the not so great, is breathe them in, feel them. They came to us to experience. This very thing that I'm triggered about, or this very thing that I'm happy about, came to me so that God can know the experience of joy, happy, anger, sadness, and then we let it go. It's just like the tides or a leaf on the river. It just comes and it goes, and we don't fret over the leaf. We know it's happy. And so all of our emotions should do exactly the same thing. And then we do that, we create more spaciousness for presence as a man. So as a man in my relationship, my number one thing is to provide safety. The second thing is to be present. My partner needs to feel my presence. She needs to be able to feel me without my words or my hug. She needs to feel my soul in the room and my undivided attention. And in that moment, your beloved can become more unraveled, because she doesn't have to go looking for you. She can feel you.
From everything that you've just shared there, Michael, I think one of the most profound teachings of that is just the level of trust that you begin to create within yourself, because there's a sense of self-advocacy there. You're really tuning into yourself. You're recognizing that there is a trigger. There is, there might be this elephant in the room, but your partner's not responsible for how you're feeling. That's your own internal process. And you're doing it in front of the person. You're saying, I need to take this moment for myself to process this so that I can show up and we can move through whatever we're moving through. And I find that so interesting. And now I've never thought of it in that way until you ran through that process. But that's a very healthy way. But people don't think that that's possible, because there's also a thing of you've got to be witnessed in that moment as well, in that vulnerability. And that vulnerability is actually just being vulnerable with yourself. It's a recognition of the emotion. It's the courage to sit within the emotion and to express the emotion and to be seen by yourself and by someone else as you're moving through that process, that alchemical process. How has that awareness, or even just a process that you can liken to that, helped you in terms of parenting and connecting with your children? Because I know, our children, I find, are honestly our greatest teachers. They know how to press buttons and how to pinpoint things and bring things up which we have yet to understand about ourselves or yet to heal. How is your understanding now of vulnerability and building this trust and advocating for your feelings, how's that helped you be a better father at the end of the day?
Yeah, it's my kids have had two versions of me. So between 0 and 7, they got the materialistic, capitalistic, wildly driven, intense, borderline narcissistic, like just all about myself, and my money and my work, and that was all that really mattered, and everything fell in line after that. And then from 7 beyond, they've got this polarized version, completely polarized version to that, where that everything got flipped. And in that cataclysmic moment, when I made that was a big shift in a finite period. I came out the next day, and the way I related to them and the way I could empathize with them so the pivotal point was I was suppressing and hiding my emotions from them. And in that older version of myself, they never saw me cry. They never saw me anger. I'd be like sitting on my anger. Everyone knew I was angry, but I thought I was hiding it. And in this new version, I sat them down not long after I had that change, and I said, I owe you the deepest apology. I said, I'm so sorry. I did a process one day where I sat in a situation with my dad from 20 odd years ago, and I sat in my body and felt what it felt like to be a me in that moment. And I thought, my dad hates me. I'm annoying. He might even hit me next. All that was me in my body. And then the next process, I stepped into his body and I looked out the world through him. He didn't even know I was in the room. He was so caught up with his own things and his own world and his own problems and marriage and things that were going on for him that he was disassociated. I wasn't even in there. So in that moment, I thought, I've been doing exactly the same thing to my kids by hiding my emotions and by hiding what's going on in my world and putting on this stoic face that everything's all right when I want to kill myself. And so that day I sat down with him. It was the most beautiful experience, horrible and beautiful, like it was confronting. And I said, I'm really sorry. I never want you to sit in the same lounge room as me and think that I hate you or I don't love you or you annoy me, all because of I'm so hiding. And I said, I need to be really honest with you. It was only a couple of weeks ago I wanted to take my own life off this very balcony. And I expressed and I said it, and I started to cry and I started to experience all the emotions. And the kids said the most beautiful thing. And they just seemed to know what to do, just because they were young, really young, as an not a fully formed ego yet. They just knew what to do. And Zave just walked over and hugged me. He held me. And Millie came over and sat next to me, and she just said, we will always love you. There's nothing you need to do. And here I was hiding myself and all of my pain from them, realizing I was probably causing more damage at the same time, thinking, oh, my dad hates me, or he hates it when I'm here, because when I'm here, he's always grumpy or he's always sad. So maybe it's me. And every child thinks that. Like every kid thinks it's them, and it's up to them to then try and fix it for their parents. They all want to save their parents. Every child on the planet does that. And I had no idea I was fueling it and making it worse for them. So they gave me this, as you said, kids are the greatest teacher. They gave me the example of how to hold space. You know, they waited until I'd finished speaking. They waited until I'd cried. They waited until I stopped, and then they moved in. I mean, that's textbook holding space, is let the person fully process. Don't interrupt them. Don't suppress them even more. And then when I was finished, they didn't tell me it's going to be all right. They didn't tell me all the things that we used to get told, like, don't cry, don't be upset, oh, it's okay. Everyone's downplaying your pain. They let it play out in full. And then they just said, Zave held me at the end. Millie said, we love you. I mean, if we could have all as adults hold our partners in the same way as my kids held me, you know, our world would be a different place. And this is something about we touched on before, both of you have touched on it, around vulnerability, is It's beautiful to be vulnerable. It's incredible. It's freeing. It's growth. It's expansive. It's not contracted. The opposite of vulnerability is withdrawn and pulled in. It's contracted, but we all want to live in this expanded state, right? So vulnerability is expansive. But then there's another part of the equation which people don't really get to talk about, is the space holding of that. If you're going to show vulnerability and you're going to ask for vulnerability, then it is your right to hold that person through that vulnerability and never use it against them, and never turn their vulnerability as like, I'm feeling this. 10 minutes later, you bag the guy for it. Do you think he's going to open up again? But systemically, I see this with men where they go, okay, I'll express, and then get clobbered over the top later on for expressing it. And it feeds more into their confusion, which feeds more into their suppression. So there's a real one thing to be vulnerable, but it's another thing to receive the person's vulnerability. And the only way to receive that vulnerability is with radical acceptance, even if you're the perceived perpetrator. So if I am listening to my beloved and she's at me for the thing I've done, which I didn't do, like, you don't do enough of the dishes. I do the dishes every night, every morning, and every lunch. There's no other dishes to do. She's not talking about that. She doesn't feel valued. She doesn't feel appreciated. Yeah, and so it's about expressing the vulnerability, me receiving her vulnerability, even if it's untrue, because that's true for her, and allow her reality. I was like, okay, honey, I understand that that's my actions that are leading you to believe that I haven't done the dishes. I could pull out my spreadsheet if you wanted and show you all the times that I've done the dishes and try and prove you wrong, but I'm only creating more distance. I'm not getting what either of us really desire, which is connection. And like we've already mentioned, vulnerability creates a greater level of connection. So if I can sit there and go, okay, honey, I can see that's your truth. I can't hold that as my truth. Like, I'm not going to say it like that. But in my mind, I can. But I'd be like, honey, I can completely see where you're coming from with that. Now what I want to do is be in a tune with her and go, well, what's the message behind the message? You know, she's talking about the dishes. What is she really communicating here? She's saying that she does the dishes all the time and she does this and that. She's not feeling appreciated, or she's not feeling valued. And in that moment, I would say to her, honey, what I'm really feeling like I get, and I can see the dishes are still there tonight. Allow her reality to be true. And then I say, well, but what I'm really sensing is that maybe I'm not valuing you enough. Maybe I'm not seeing all the work you do around the house. Maybe I'm not seeing the late nights that you've been putting in with the kids, X, Y, and Z. And now the dishes don't even matter. They don't even exist. The dishes were never there in the first place. They're just the lever that I know will push the button to get you engaged so I can feel you. It's just this loop that we keep going around, and it's the same thing, and it always feeds itself. So,
but at the same time, do the dishes.
Do the dishes anyway.
Do the dishes as well.
Do the dishes and value, yes.
Yeah. I just had a question for Nick, which was, as someone that is close to Michael, how has Michael's journey influenced your own views on masculinity and vulnerability? How has that shifted for you since, I'd love to know, because I mean, I as the receiver of you, I can tell you the shifts and the changes that I've seen, but I'd like for you to.
It's pretty on the spot, mate.
Having had the conversations, and I'd say even before the conversations, just your presence in general, just seeing how you've been so unapologetic in embodying yourself and standing in a space where you don't mind being seen, you don't mind being questioned, you don't mind having a different perspective or a different opinion, and you're unapologetic around your truth as well. I think just with that and honestly, just the fact that you are just so at ease and at peace with yourself and the journey that you've been on, that just gave me such a big permission slip to take any chips that I had on my shoulder and any idea around expressing my emotions or being more seen by myself even before my partner. It just gave me it gave me the space to explore that, because I looked at you and I'd say, wow, like here's someone that lived the life that I'd always dreamed of in so many levels, from the corporate standpoint, because that was the vision that I maybe had when I was a younger man. And yeah, you took it and you made a very similar decision to myself, and you put it all to the wayside, and you just said, I'm going to follow my heart. I'm going to live my fucking truth. I'm going to be unapologetic. I'm going to say yes to me and essentially like fuck the system and whatever has been, pushed down my throat. Like I'm no longer swallowing that anymore. And that in itself, I don't know. I just think I think just through your own journey, that gave me a sense of peace within the decisions that I had made, and maybe I had yet to express it in the ways that you've expressed it. And I just don't think I had the permission slip, like I said, to do that, because I just felt, well, I don't know if it's something that I can do, if it's okay to do that, if it's okay to share these things. Is this healthy, or is this me being codependent? Is this okay, or is this am I allowed to be as I am as a man and still hold that space and still have that level of respect within myself and within my relationship specifically? So I think if I had to answer it, I can't give you the exact, because I'm not receiving myself here, Karis, but
As someone has been the receiver and perceiver of you, it's just been incredible to see how and feel the shift, and even to witness that within your children. Do you want to just take a cookie? I just have one quick question.
That again.
Yeah. We'll just tag team it.
Go again. Okay.
I think he's officially teething. This is completely outside the realms of what I thought this was going to look and feel like. But I hope you know that I'm 100%, yeah, like
Amazing.
And with her as well. I think I just had to say to her, like, I'm with you as well. Mommy's here. I haven't gone anywhere.
It's all good.
As someone that's been the perceiver and receiver of Nick and witnessed the shift in our home, what I've seen, and this is something that I've seen with a lot of men who have father wounds as well. And I mean, even just finding, as much as I could have said to Nick, like, I love you, I can hold this, I'm here. I think he needed, like he said, that permission slip from someone who he sees as a mentor, or, in the, I'm not saying that you're his father or even close to old enough to be that.
I am. I'm old now. I'm okay with that.
No, not at all. But I think there was just something that went with you giving him permission to really just go deeply into that shifted something. It's like, oh, actually, like someone on the other side who I respect deeply as a man and as a being said, oh, it's okay. He sees it and it's okay. And I think there's so much, there's if you're listening, there's so much value and weight in that, just the simplicity of a permission slip and how much it can shift and change your life. But I really see how there's a deep turning away from the vulnerability, especially when there hasn't been the modeling of that from the father. And so
I would love to know what it's like for you. So as the representation of the feminine, so Nick was working one way, pivoted and started to make some changes and some shifts. What happened in your body in that when it started? What was it? Talk to me about that. What was the feeling?
If I can go into what that felt like, I think I almost feel giddy with it because I've been waiting for the shift for years. I almost feel like it feels really delicious and just like I almost melt. Like I almost go like, like there's something in my nervous system that is like, oh, okay. Like I almost, it's like from, I don't know if you look at, there's a scientific, probably in science, chemical reaction where you go from solid to completely liquid. Yeah, that's essentially, because it's like something in my system when like, oh, I'm completely safe. I can just.
And this is what I would love everyone, whether you're a man or a woman listening to this, that description is exactly what it should be.
Yeah.
That is the perfect description of it. And it's what it's invoking is at an unconscious level, the safety for you to fall more into your feminine.
Yes.
And all of the words you described, and this is all unconscious, right? This is just happening by an energetic shift in him, which was creating the pillar, which is the arrow. So men is or masculine, sorry, is like the arrow. We're directional. We go from A to B. The feminine is circle. She's whole and complete. And in that moment, he penetrated you with the straight line. We need both circles and lines, right? And when that comes together, you fall back into what your default desired state to be is out of the doing and into the being. You started speaking about words like gooey and warm and melting and all the beautiful, pleasurable feelings of the feminine.
Yeah.
All because he chose to stand in his masculine. And so what you did was create polarity. He gave you the permission to fall more into your feminine.
And it wasn't just that. It was like, I mean, if I can go into not all the ways that it shifted, but for me, also one of the big things that happened since then was it allowed me to go back into my relationship with God or spirit in a much deeper way that I felt sort of untethered by for a long time, because I've had to focus and put so much of my energy into being and being a role that I shouldn't have been in the first place, you know? And so it's like, I almost feel so settled in my relationship with like God and spirit in a really deep embodied way that I feel so anchored in that. And I said to him the other day that like, it's almost like I know that fear exists, but it doesn't have any power over me anymore in the ways that it did. Like it's just gone. And I can completely trust in the creator that holds me. And it's because I'm allowed to. I have the space to, and I have the safety to. And the dynamic in our home has shifted because I can really just play in this like melty space, like with my kids. Instead of focusing on doing and executing and like all of those things that I thought I had to do in order to be a good mother, but it was just because I didn't trust the expression of masculinity without vulnerability, because you need that.
Yeah.
And as soon as Nick did that and he gave himself permission to do that, it was like, whoa, okay, this is what it is. Thank God. And then on top of that, like the sex, wow, completely night and day. So
because it falls more and more into that safety, which creates openness. So the feminine, she needs her heart turned on, but she needs her mind turned on. Then the body will open. So, but men, we're body first. We're animalistic. We're very primal, and we're turned on by sight. But the woman, she needs her heart and mind. And if the mind is busy because I've got to do this and I've got to do that, and I've got emails and I've got doing things to do, the masculine, well, how can I drop into my feminine and open the feminine part of my body to you? And so, naturally, when he steps more into his masculine and vulnerability, which is king energy, you can open more into the divine, into the oracle. And it's like you said, it's coming from above. And so naturally, the polarity for the both of you would have opened up so much, because you could drop your masculine shield because you didn't have to do the masculine things. He didn't have to defend his masculinity, which was chewing up energy, and didn't have to lean more in his feminine to create balance. And all of a sudden, the sexual charge is like electric. I love that for you both. I love that. To your listeners, side benefit.
So, Michael, one of the last question that I want to just leave our listeners with, and maybe we have gone into it with more detail, but just for a man that is listening to this, and he has a clear idea, like he recognizes that he might not necessarily be as in touch with himself as he needs to be, and he's never really had the means nor the understanding to express his emotions in a safe and healthy way. What would you recommend as a first step to starting this journey of accessing vulnerability?
Is this man with a partner or without a partner?
As a man just trying to access this with inside of themselves initially. So just work on that avatar.
So we'll work on, let's do that. So I'm going to be really honest and say it's so easy and wildly difficult. It's because of the conditioning and the stories and the judgment. And all judgment is self-judgment. So the only judgment you have about being vulnerable is you judging yourself. And sometimes society will reinforce that because you need that message. But unfortunately, it's not easy to do. But it has to start really small, have to start really simple. And I think the first thing is most men, if we take that general stereotypical kind of man that we were talking about, they have an eye problem. They can't look other men in the eye. They probably can't look themselves in the eye. If I'm really honest, if I said 10 guys line up, stand in front of a mirror really close and just look yourself in the eye, you'll see fidgeting, jokes, humor, laughter, looking away, disassociation. Because they're not willing to be vulnerable with themselves. And you can only be vulnerable with someone else to the degree that you're capable of being vulnerable with yourself. So I would suggest for that type of person, and as weird as this sounds, and I know it is weird, but let's just be honest, it's weird, it's odd. Stand in front of the mirror or sit in front of the mirror for 5 minutes in the morning and look yourself in the eye. That's just it. Get through that and you've done well. Do 5 minutes of that. If you've done none of this before, you're not in tune, never expressed emotions, can't feel your body, numb, maybe you're taking things too numb like smoking, drinking, drugs, porn, prostitutes, all of the things so I don't have to feel. And feeling is the vulnerability. I don't want to be sitting with myself. That's too much. So if you can get through that first 5 minutes, you've done amazing. The next step would be to sit in front of the mirror for 5 minutes and look yourself in the eye. And then the next thing would be to catch the things that come up, the judgment. This is weird. This is stupid. This is woo-woo. This is that spiritual shit they said don't do. But can you just catch all of the stories that come up and go, wow, I run that story. That's cool. Because I've been running the story the whole time. I just didn't know it was unconscious. Now I'm aware of it. So it means I'm conscious to having these thoughts. And then we don't move into a space of judgment around that. It's acceptance. Like we said with vulnerability, I think halfway through this podcast, we shared that it's important to be vulnerable, but it's more important to be received in that vulnerability. Well, again, you're going to have to do that for yourself right now. So that's sitting in front of the mirror, look yourself in the eye, catch all of your judgments, because that's what they are, and then accept those judgments. Practice both of these. So practice the vulnerability of like, oh, I'm ugly. Wow, I really don't like the way I look. Wow, I hate my nose. Wow, my breath stinks. Whatever comes up, right? And then come to a space of acceptance is like, yeah, maybe I am ugly. Yeah, maybe I do have an ugly nose. Yeah, my breath definitely stinks. Add humor to it. It doesn't need to be serious. Like we can have a lens of ourselves as well. Because ultimately, if you look at any of the Buddhas or any of the great masters, They had the greatest of belly laughs. You can always experience someone's level of joy by the depth of their belly laugh. And they learned to laugh at all the things. I have bad breath. I do have bad breath. That's how they react to everything. Everything is joy. And so the huge part is allowing. Have your judgments and allow them. That's called acceptance. Imagine if you took that to your partner. You judge her for the way she XYZs. And if you allowed that, now there's no tension. Now there's no conflict. There's nothing to resolve because there's no charge over it. So sit in front of the mirror and practice allowing of your own crap. And I think those 2 steps, if you did that over 2 weeks, one, you'll realize the noise and the chatter that comes up will diminish because you're just constantly allowing the thoughts. You're not feeding them. You're not saying yes. You're not saying and making it worse and doubling down on it. You just, that was a thought, let it go. That was a thought, let it go. And that's what I would suggest, just those 2 practices to start with. If you wanted to scale that, you can take that into your relationships and do similar things. So for your relationship, if it was someone in a relationship, there's a beautiful practice saying, I see and I feel. This is basically attuning to my partner. So if I was in a practice with Nick and I'm sitting here looking at him, I would look at him and I would really try and find what's alive in Nick without Nick telling me. And I'd read his eyes and I'd see the heaviness in his eyes. And I'm like, I see a man with a lot on his plate right now. And maybe he does. And maybe that's the one thing that he goes, holy wow, she sees me. And you, Nick, in that position are allowing yourself to be seen, which is the vulnerability piece. Yeah. And so by you being, the vulnerability doesn't always need to be my words. I can sit here right in front of you and go, okay, normally I'm in front of Nick and I've got my business thing on and I'm all smiley and all that. And today I'm going to be really honest and go, mate, I can have it in. And I'm going to express whatever is alive in me with my face or my jaw or my eyes. I can communicate so much with my eyes. And the least trained person in the world would look at you and go, are you okay? You don't seem yourself today. It's an attunement. It's tuning into that person. But as a beloved in a relationship, I actually want to be able to speak to that. For my partner, I'd love to say, honey, I feel like you're not feeling appreciated. And when you're in attunement, always know what it is. You've got to be brave enough to speak into it. And in that moment, you've penetrated your partner and it allows her to open and be real. And maybe she cries. And so that practice is, I share something, you share something. And I really feel into what I see. I need to be vulnerable and allow myself to be seen. And I also need to be vulnerable and share what I'm actually seeing. And that's a vulnerability practice. That's taking it a fair way up. If you're just starting out, start with yourself. Everything starts with self.
Thank you for that. I think that'll be invaluable for someone that just wants to start this practice. And I can tell you just the idea of mirror work, that in itself is a very uncomfortable practice, and it's available to you.
Wildly uncomfortable still.
Wildly comfortable.
It is. I remember when I first read it in 2006. It was Louise Hay's You Can Heal Yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, I was deep into my disassociation. I wasn't in my body at all, and that was the hardest thing. I hated it. I can still feel how icky it was for me to do. And I didn't stick at it. It took me years to circle back around and do that. I did not enjoy it.
It's very confronting.
Especially if you disassociate and disconnected from your body. It's too much. But
no, sure.
We've all got to start somewhere.
I think it just opens you up, and then you recognize, oh goodness, there's a couple of spaces that I need to look at and work on. Michael, I just want to say thank you so much for today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your presence and your input. And this was enlightening for myself, and I'm sure for Karis as well. He's not run off with baby. But thank you for just sharing your wisdom and your experience, and for being so vulnerable in sharing and expressing your own journey as well. Just for anyone that's listening, where can they find you? Because I know I'm a little bit off the grid, and you've got like a whole new Instagram profile, but where can people find it? I'm also happy to just pop your Linktree link in the description of the podcast as well, if anyone does want to get hold of you. But if there is any specific space which would be ideal, or would that be the specific space?
Yeah, just so we're not being convoluted and cryptic for your audience, I'm not on social media anymore. I had quite a following. I did all my work on there, and I've decided to remove myself from that world to, I guess, be more vulnerable, to come back into myself, to spend more time in my own practices and deepening that connection and sitting with more elders. But yeah, the Linktree is the greatest way. So I don't have socials anymore. My vision is to not have socials again. I'm really enjoying that. It feels really healthy, and no judgment on that. I really don't. This is purely just my path, and it's a path that I was always on, and I've just rebelled against doing it. But Linktree is the best way, mate. Yeah, that is definitely the best way. I've got a website. It'll all be on the Linktree, so go from there.
Perfect. No, I'll make sure that is here. So if you are looking to connect with Michael, please just go to the description in there. All these details will be there. But other than that, for everyone listening, I hope that there was something that you could take away from this and apply to your life, to your relationships, and that you now have a permission slip to express yourself a little bit more, and to recognize that self-expression and handling your emotions is a good thing. So if anyone is interested in diving in deeper into themselves, you can check out our website at yourfrequencyshift.com. We have our private coaching and human design. And if you want to reach out, or if you have any questions or anything really sat with you, please feel free to do so. And as always, you have the ability to make the shift.